speakers, then you're more than welcome. Okay, so I'll introduce the two speakers. You know, we've got John Finnie, and I'll introduce him after our first speaker, and then we'll go to the discussion. Okay, so the first person I want to introduce you to is Sandra Webster, who's the other joint national spokesman of the Scottish Socialist Party, and it's fair to say Sandra was heavily involved in the campaign. I suppose it's a sub-theme of this meeting in many ways. The campaign that was initiated by the Scottish Socialist Party, by CND, by the Stop the War Coalition, etc. No to NATO. You know, it was an effort to try and get the SNP not to change its 30-odd year policy on NATO, and took the view that NATO was a warmongering machine, and that we didn't want to be part of it in Scotland, and independent Scotland shouldn't look in that direction. It should look towards being a standard bearer of peace throughout the world, rather than a belligerent and a warmonger. And she's very heavily involved in that campaign, and so I want you to give a nice warm welcome, because she's come all the way from Paisley. Adele nearly came from Glasgow, and John's come all the way from Inverness, so I hope there's somebody local. Anyway, I hope you give a nice round of applause to Sandra.
Hi again, it's really good again to be over in the East Coast. I was born in Dundee, so I always feel the air's pressure through here, you know, away from Paisley. We've not had any snow in Paisley. My boys are so disappointed, you know. You've had a lot of snow in Edinburgh, I heard. I was looking forward to seeing some.
I'll sell you some of ours.
Right, I'll take some home with me. I always start by saying that I'm Sandra, not in this order. I'm a woman, I'm a mother, I'm a feminist, and I'm so looking forward to independence of 2014. Please let there be independence of 2014, actually.
Here's a safe bet.
Fingers crossed, on my toes. And see when I see what's happening locally, nationally, all the cuts that are coming about, you know, they're being made by a government down in Westminster who are totally out of touch with the people of Scotland, with the people in most parts of England, actually. One good thing you can say about the Tories, they do believe in positive discrimination. When it comes to these round of cuts, who's getting most affected? It's women and children and the poor. Of course, their friends, the bankers, you know, their tax actually is going to be cut by £50,000 next year. It's women and children and the disadvantaged, people who rely on services who are in the firing line, both in the local level. I know the cuts that are happening, cuts to day services, hospital cuts. In Paisley, the community rehab team that takes people from the from long-term hospital into their own homes has vanished overnight. There's no support or community care, and that's what's happening. People are being left to flounder. And on top of that as well, I'm not even going to call them benefit reforms or benefit cuts. Again, it's the poor people who have been attacking. You've probably heard of ATOS who don't give a toss, and their work capability assessments. We've got a place in Glasgow called Cadonan House. It's an amazing place. It's like Lourdes, actually. People go in there, they're cured of their illnesses. Hallelujah! You know, they're fit for work. All their benefits are cut away from them, and they're left on £70 a week, you know. So they have to go near the job market if everybody else is looking for a job. I checked in Paisley today, and there are only 4 new jobs advertised. So there's more and more people looking for jobs. Would you give a job to someone who's got a history of mental health problems or a learning disability? You know, when you've got someone with 8 A-levels or whatever, you know, who would get the job? So basically, I mean, it really is nothing more than an attack on the poor. I know they say, you know, we're all in this together, but it's the poor people who are most affected by this. I don't know if you saw today, believe it or not, IMF, the head of the IMF service, the chief economist, whose name is Olivia Blanchard. Paolo and I were talking about this earlier. He's the chief economist of the International Monetary Fund, and he's actually said that we should stop austerity cuts. He recommended the government stops them. And he's not exactly a socialist or a friend of the poor, but people can see it's richer countries that have been affected most by this economic downturn. I mean, I'm really sorry to say this, folks, but next year is going to be even more hellish. This is the year when the cuts really start to impact. And it's not going to affect the people, you know, the Tories like to talk about, you know, all the poor people who lie in their beds all day with their curtains shut. It's going to affect people who we know. It's going to affect me, actually. I'm going to be affected by the bedroom tax. I've got a son in residential school, and because he's in residential school because he's autism, I'm going to have to try and find an extra £11 a week, you know. And some people are going to have to find 25% of their housing benefit cut. The housing authorities have already put benefit teams into place because they know there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be made homeless. It's a shock. It's really a holocaust on the poor people. The other thing about the the bedroom tax, it doesn't only affect poor people. If people are foster carers and live in social housing and they have a spare bedroom waiting for a potential foster child to come in, they won't be exempt either. They're going to have to find the money. Families whose sons are in the army and away on a tour of duty, they're going to have to pay this as well. And this is even the fact that Cameron promised this covenant to the army. He's lying about that as well. In fact, there's the only way you can tell when a Tory's lying, the old joke, when his lips are moving, these people. Well, please don't believe their lies, people on benefits are scroungers, they're lying all day, they're doing wonderfully, all this money they're getting, How can people afford to earn £70 a week? I put my hat out to everybody who manages to survive on that, it's just miraculous. We've got Lord Freud, who's got a 16-bedroom house, telling people to avoid the housing tax, bedroom tax. Why don't you get a sofa bed in your living room, and live in that? Thanks a lot for that. I know. Another thing that they're actually doing at the moment is gagging charities. The private sector, Barnados, Capability Scotland, they're giving them contracts. There was a report in the government yesterday saying that if they're given one of these contracts, there's a gag on them, they're not allowed to speak out against it. So people are being gagged and not allowed to talk. This is something that I read yesterday about this as well. The reason that they gave for this yesterday, it's like doublespeak, George Orwell. The reason why they shouldn't, the reason why charities shouldn't speak out is information to the public should be processed by proper designated channels. In other words, they want to whitewash it and hide behind the statistics, unfortunately. There's only one positive about this actually, because we can all see through this, can't we? We know it's lies, and I think it's great for us for the independence campaign. Do we want to be ruled by people who make these decisions, who don't seem to realise, how much people are being affected? I think the prospect of another 5 years of Tory rule, is pretty horrific. That's why I'm praying for 2014 and a yes vote, please. I know we're attacked. You won't manage this yourself. You're just poor people. You're a small nation. There's lots of small nations in the world. And I think independence, this has always been part of the SSP message, it's our right to be given the opportunity to make our own decisions. Some of them might not go very well, we might make mistakes, but they'll be our mistakes. We'll decide, what we're going to do. I don't know if you remember Steve Bell, he writes for The Guardian, in the 80s he called Scotland a testing ground, and it seems to be the place where they put the tyrant submarines, where they brought in the poll tax first of all, because we don't really matter to them, they're quite far away in the southeast. And one thing we can say about the SSP is Colin and others were involved at the very beginning in the Scottish Independent Convention, the right to independence. And I want to emphasise, like John will agree, independence doesn't belong to a single party. I think the unionists want to attack it and say, oh, it's just an SNP project. I was brought up, in a very Labour home, and my parents were very anti, Scottish independence. I remember my father saying, Sandra, independence, it's the devil's playground. We can't do this, we can't stand on our own. So, after all that propaganda, I've made the decision, and still fighting with some of my siblings about, I want independence, the reason why. And this power and I were saying earlier on, it's something that we all have a part to play, and we can all talk to our friends, we can talk to people in the street, and as a party, and as individuals, we can campaign as well. You probably heard me saying this over and over again, but my hope for a Scottish independent socialist nation is a modern socialist Scotland, a kinder, fairer society. When I look down south where the national health and the welfare state, it's being dismantled, we can hold on to the things that are important to us, that make us a society, the glue that binds us together, the kindness of strangers to look after each other. I also read today about higher education. You're probably aware that that people from more disadvantaged backgrounds don't have equal access. And St Andrews and Edinburgh and Glasgow were complaining that middle class students were going to be disadvantaged by this, and there shouldn't be this measure for working class students who need more support. And I hope we can have a nation where my children and your children can be treasured, for who they are. Yesterday I was at a demo in Glasgow. Glasgow is much further down the road about personalisation. Have you heard about personalisation? Sounds a wonderful idea. People will be given their budgets and they can use it to spend it, to access day services and independent living, but in reality people are given very little money. They're spending their day walking around day centres. It's not acceptable. They've been cared for in church halls where they're not suitable. You know, they'd be against the law actually. You know, no wheelchair access or things. But the good thing about it was, in most demos, people who have been to a lot of demos will know you see the same faces over and again. Hello, how you doing? Here's another demo. But yesterday it was amazing. There was 150 people, and most of them were carers. You know, they were my friends were there, and for a lot of people it was the first time they'd been at a demo. And you know, the most powerful voices came from the carers, you know, who spoke. Not the people who were politicians, you know what I mean, who were just going on about cuts and the usual thing. That's it. And that's what they're doing. They're divided and conquering, but also conquering the government. But I also get a feeling that this year that people are getting more and more angry. Paul and I keep having things on Facebook about how terrible things are, but I really feel that people are getting angry now, you know, and wanting to fight back, and that was really a good sign yesterday, seeing so many people doing that. And the final thing I can possibly say is the SSP, we're not poverty tourists. We're poor, we live in local communities, we work in local communities, and we know how people live. But we're not in ivory towers, you know, and making sort of plans or 5-year plans. We know what things are like. And we're not actually here just to talk about and have a conference about poverty or an independent Scotland. We're actually here to make a difference. And that's why I'm a member of the SSP. Right, I've brought a book. I highly recommend it. There's a guy called Tom Leonard who was a writer in residence in Paisley. And I know this is like Bun Supper, but I'm actually going to read you a poem by someone from Paisley called Alexander Wilson. And he's talking about a book called The Rights of Men, which Thomas Paine wrote in 1792. And at that time it says that The Rights of Man was the third most popular book beside the Bible and Bun's poem in Scotland. And this is his poem, I'll read a bit from it. The Rights of Man is new well keened and read by mony a hunter. For Tammy Paine the book has penned and lent the courts a lounder. It's like a keeking glass to see the craft of kirk and statesman, and we abode in easy glee, good faith the birkie beats them, offhand this day. I like that line, you know, it's like a keeking glass to see. When you look at things that are happening, what the Tories are doing, use your eyes, keep your eyes open, and look and see behind the lies that they tell, you know, and let's work together to make this a carer, finder, kinder society. At the moment I'm seeing people who I refer as poverty capitalists who are making money from poor people. Poor people are now a new industry. But if we all look after each other and look after each other, we can make a difference. So thank you very much for listening to me.
What you made at the very beginning reminded me, last week, many people like you and like me last week watched that debate in Parliament when the Tories and the Liberals put through a bill saying that benefits claimants would have their benefits capped at 1% for the next 3 years. I remember watching it and I'm thinking, do you know what? From time to time you're reminded just why it is you hate the Tories. Just exactly what it is these people rub you up the wrong way all about. Because in the case of that debate, here was a government party, a Prime Minister, Cabinet Ministers, public school boys for Eton and Harrow, Oxford and University graduates, all the rest of them, apparently clever people, basically blaming the unemployed, not just for being unemployed, but blaming the unemployed for a crisis that they cretins created. And from time to time, the Tories do us a great service in this country. Because I remember thinking there must have been tens of millions of people up and down the length of breadth of Britain recognise what it is about these people that we simply can't stand. And I think Sandra is entirely right to remind us that independence, the struggle for independence is saying that is brought to an end under independence. Not only no more Tory governments, but no more victimising the disabled, no more making the disabled dance down at York Place with ethos to prove they can still qualify for the disability living allowance, no more making unemployed benefits claimants on £70 a week, £70 a week, blaming them for a recession that was caused by Fred the Shred and the multi-billionaire bankers. So good for the Tories, but high time we're reminded how much we hate them. and I welcome them for that. I was interviewed by a journalist ahead of this meeting and said, "Oh, I see you're having a meeting, John Finnie and Sandra, Dalry, you're having a meeting in Alistair Darling's constituency." That's brave of you. Because he's, after all, you know, Mr. Better Together. He's the leader of the No campaign. And I remember saying to myself, what have we done? What have we done? We've gone into Dalry. And of course it's Alistair Darling's fiefdom. And oh my God, I was terrified for a millisecond. And I felt like slapping the guy for being so stupid. In 2010, I stood against Alistair Darling in the general election, as people remember. And the good people, the good 235 people who voted for me, and all the rest of them, aren't they good people? No. I remember standing against them as the Scottish Socialist Party candidate, and there was a hustings in Juniper Green, because this constituency, Edinburgh South West, now goes from Haymarket Station out to the far end of Balerno and Curry, takes in Juniper Green. And Juniper Green and Curry and Balerno Community Council organised the hustings. I don't know if anybody was here, perhaps there's one or two of you there. 550 people turned up for the hustings, and it was one of these, you know, these old these churches where outside is old, but they've modernised the inside, and it was like big kind of stalls. Do you call them in churches stalls? Anyway, stalls, and then the upper circle, or whatever it's called. You know, I must apologise for my ignorance as far as religion is concerned. Anyway, and the chairman, he gets the candidates. I think there's about 7 or 8 of us. As an icebreaker, he said, an icebreaker. Maybe each of the candidates could explain who they'd like to bring along tonight. Just an icebreaker, you know, it's a second or two, right? And so he introduces them to speak. And Alistair Darling said, "I'd have liked to have brought along Clement Attlee, because I'm a big fan of Clement Attlee, he's my hero." And I remember sitting there going, what the fucking shit this guy's got, man. He's lucky if he could spell Attlee. The fact is that Clement Attlee's Labour government nationalised the coal mines, nationalised the steel industry, established the National Health Service, established the Edinburgh Festival. We could be here all day long. Alistair Darling! God almighty, he's got a cheat. But of course that's what you get with Labour, isn't it? They're a big fan of Keir Hardie now that he's dead. But a big fan, Tony Benn will be, Alistair Darling, I'm a big fan of Tony Benn when he passes away. Can't he stand him the new while he's alive, or any stands for? And I thought, Alistair Darling! Dalry people in Gorg and Dalry, he's a Humpty. And they know it in Gorg and Dalry as much as anywhere else. The thing I was going to say about independence is, it does remind you that those of us all gathered here, and I would suggest hundreds of thousands of other Scots, our vision of independence is, in independence we have full employment. In independence we have no nuclear weapons. We don't belong to NATO. We redistribute the wealth of this country, this wealthy country, towards those who need it from those who have it. And yesterday, I'm sure you've looked at this, as many of us have done, we're in the middle of the worst recession in 80 years in Scotland. Yesterday the unemployment figures come out and they said unemployment has gone down, official unemployment has gone down. And let's leave aside the usual government manipulation of the figures, just take that as read. But on the face of it they're saying first recession ever where unemployment has been falling. You're going to say perhaps as this is the early days of a recovery. Recovery my arse. What is happening is a relatively new phenomena where there's now more people underemployed than there is unemployed. Underemployment is the term that they've come up with to describe, see if you want a full-time job and you can't get it and you've got to settle for 16 hours, you're underemployed. You've got casual, temporary, insecure work. Millions of people who used to have full-time jobs, with pay that went along with a full-time job, now have to settle for part-time jobs with part-time pay and claim the other benefits on top of it. So they can't pay the rent for themselves, they can't pay the council tax for themselves. They're having to settle for it. It's not their choice, it's not our choice. And so you look at it and you go, one minute they're saying 4,000 staff at Comet fired down the road, full-time, permanent, secure, down the road. 4,000 people at Blockbusters, full-time, permanent, secure, fired down the road. But lo and behold, McDonald's, they'll take you on up the road there at Gorgie for 14 hours a week. That's what's going on. That's why you've got everybody's living standards plummeting, but apparently unemployment's not falling, because rather than go through the humiliation that many of us have to do up to high rigs fill in form after form after form, constantly explain what you're doing to have to look for work. And in return for the humiliation, they give you the grandiose sum of £70 to keep you and your family. And a lot of people are going, do you know what, shove it up your arse. Because I'd sooner do a couple of car boot sales and get £70 than have to go through that humiliation. And again, that's what we're dealing with. And I raise these things by way of introducing our second speaker because these are relevant. If independence isn't about this, then friends, it's about nothing. These are the issues that the Yes Scotland campaign is trying to convey. This is serious, this is important, and this is a chance to change all of that. And so in introducing John Finnie, I want to just tell you how I come across John Finnie. I was speaking at the Prison Officers Association Union Conference. You know, we get socked in prison within a stone throw of you here. You have a really good stone thrower for it here, but anyway, it's just along the road. The Prison Officers Union invited me to come and speak alongside John Finnie at their annual conference in Peebles to discuss the motion. This union believes our members' best interests are best served by remaining part of the United Kingdom. Me and John Finnie, David McLetchie and Lewis MacDonald for Labour, that was the lineup. So I was up in the Prison Officers Union offices just next to Saughton Prison. I think it was on the Tuesday. It had been the Tuesday, Monday or Tuesday, right after the SNP conference. And the guy, we're talking about the conference and what I should say and whatnot. And he's got his iPad and he goes, oh, it's on the news. There's a guy called John Finnie who's just left the SNP over the conference decision U-turn on NATO. And I go, that's the guy I'm speaking with. so I made my night. Oh, that's very kind, that's very interesting, that conference. I couldn't wait to go to the place, ran to the car, jumped the car, drove right home, on the phone. Hello, can I speak to John Finnie? John, it's Colin Fox here. I've never met you before, but I understand you left the SNP. We've got a public meeting at the Royal Commonwealth Pool on Thursday. Would you fancy coming along and speaking at that? And have, you know, he's entitled to think at the other end of the phone, he'll tell you in a minute whether he did. I think, who's this weirdo? Who's this guy? You know, I'm fending off the world's press, and there's a guy called Colin Fox that I've never met before invite me to speak at an SSP meeting. Anyway, the SNP, as you might understand, withdrew the invitation to John Finnie to speak at that union conference, and it was his former colleague Christine Graham that did it. And I would say in passing, just so you know, at that conference, Peebles, the Cardrona Hotel in Peebles, 100 delegates of that union. The motion, this union believes its members' best interests are served by remaining part of the United Kingdom, got one vote. One vote. It got 95 opposing it, and 3 abstained. And I remember thinking, the Prison Officers Union! It's not the first one I would have picked. I wouldn't have predicted that. I was expecting to get humptied up. Used to getting humptied at those kind of gatherings, you know. I'm a socialist, and they go boo and throw shoes at you, whatever it is. Right? Particularly at a conference that I must have preconceived notions about what the Prison Officers Conference was. Anyway, I was delighted. Anyway, I phoned John Finnie, the meeting in Royal Commonwealth Pool. You know, Robert Burns, or not, was William, what's his name? Robert the Bruce. If at first you don't succeed, eat a spider, or whatever it was. Anyway, I phoned him and said, John, we've got a meeting in Leith, will you come? And he says, I'd love to come, but Hearts are playing. So he went to see Hearts. So I knew if we organise a meeting next to Tynecastle, then he would come. And so there you are, if you can't go round about it, go the other way. I just wanted to say in interviewing John Finnie, this isn't the first Scottish Socialist Party meeting he spoke at. I know for a fact he spoke at the one in Pollokshields. It was fantastic, and the deal was there. It was a great meeting in the Pollokshields, big Asian community in the southeast of Glasgow, as people would know. And I should just say, to remind you, John Finnie, many years in the SNP, I'll tell you for a second. I seen him speaking at that conference at the SNP. I was up in the gallery hiding. I go in, and I don't want to show you all my tricks and tell you how I get in. I basically asked. Anyway, I sat up there and I watched him speaking, and he was terrific. And as you know, when the SNP voted that the party was going to abandon its previous principled opposition to NATO and be part of the North Atlantic Treaty Organisation responsible for invading Iraq and Afghanistan, a nuclear alliance, then he decided, and it couldn't have been easy, it would never have been easy, that he couldn't be part of a party that he'd spent his whole life in because he had that policy. He's a man of principle. Delighted to have him tonight. Give him a big round.
First Commander Harrison, good evening friends. I hope you can hear me at the back. I get accused of being very quiet spoken. It's because of my Highland voice. I'm 100% chuffed about it. I have to tell you a wee bit of personal here. My granny lived in Murdoch Terrace, just the other side of the tunnel there. And I lived away out in the country, and I used to come down here maybe once a year. And I used to be petrified with the street lights, because we lived in pitch darkness away out in the countryside. And I'd be lying in the downstairs room, it's just a wee room she had up there, and I'd be hearing people walk past in that orange light. So I still have, and obviously I come here now and again to watch football. So obviously I have a strong affection with the area. I didn't know it was a devil's playground. Maybe your dad had a premonition about Alistair Darling and he's been here. Well, I am a nationalist, but first and foremost, friends, I'm an internationalist, and I don't see any conflict whatsoever in telling you that. I think that I care every bit as much about employees in Leipzig, Leith, Luanda, wherever, because I think that's important. And in the world over, humans have far more in common than we have differences. The reality is that we invariably tend to focus on the differences. I think for the purpose of tonight, we do need to focus on the differences. And I would like to talk, and I do scripts and then I just generally ignore them. So Colin's going to kick me and tell me to shut up if we're going on too long. I'd like to talk about where we are, and I'd like to use a phrase by a very fine man, Bashir Ahmed, who was the first Asian MSP in Scotland, and who was from Pakistan, and who very much appreciated the welcome he got when he came to Scotland. And he used to say, it's not where we're from that matters, it's where we're going together. And I think that's very pertinent to tonight. So where we are at the moment is that the Scottish Parliament supports a referendum, the UK Parliament supports a referendum. A majority of MSPs in the Scottish Parliament support independence. And the House of Lords have been deliberating over this in recent times. But I have to tell you, it's not, that to me isn't remotely important. This is about the people of Scotland. This is the opportunity to make decisions. Politics is about priorities, and I have to tell you, I'm deeply uncomfortable by a lot of the priorities that are made. Now, I'll very briefly cover the NATO issue. I flagged up my discontent, I did my very best, spoke to every newspaper, I stuck to the party line initially, which was, we'll keep our powder dry until the conference. And then the next morning I listened to Angus Robertson, the party leader, speak for 10 minutes unchallenged on the radio. And I thought, well, that's not particularly even-handed. So I did my very best, and I'm very grateful to the Scottish Socialist Party and others who came along and lobbied. The cause isn't lost. I think there is an opportunity. I do wish Mr Salmon well in his negotiating. It's very, very peculiar, of course, to apply to join a club but not actually ask the club if they want you in. Now, and that was only established the day before the debate on the BBC radio when Angus Robertson admitted that was the case. I want nothing to do with nuclear weapons. I want nothing to do with nuclear power. People refer to them, and indeed the First Minister referred to them in the Parliament today as weapons of mass destruction. I get a tip from someone, and I can't remember who, it's perhaps Robin McAlpine, who said, don't call them that, call them what they are. They're weapons of widespread, indiscriminate civilian slaughter. That's what they are. And will NATO accept an independent Scotland? They would love an independent Scotland. Will they say to an independent Scotland, you can get rid of your nuclear weapons? They'll say, it's all about consensus in this organisation. Can you just hang on? We'll discuss it next year. The mighty Germany, a coalition where the foreign minister was elected on a platform of getting rid of it, following the Chicago conference last year, not only did they not get rid of these weapons, they've upgraded 24 tactical warheads. So I tell you that because it's amazing the influence that outside organisations can have on our fine country of Scotland. Not least the US defence industries, which are a very, very powerful lobby. But I better get back on script for a wee minute here. So what we've got at the moment, we've got is the British state. That's a powerful state. The British state's a powerful state. It's a nasty state. It's a very conservative state. And it always looks after its own. And the British state's own are the bankers, Sandra and Colin referred to. They're the generals, because we need our wars. They're the arms dealers, the wealthy, the powerful countries, the private schools, and they've not changed that approach, nor will they change that approach. You need to look at the makeup of the UK cabinet to see that. Now, I'm not interested in the politics of greed. I want everyone to do their very best. We're not all the same, but everyone should have the same opportunity. You are not going to have the same opportunity under the United Kingdom as you have the ability to shape under an independent Scotland. It is about priorities. And we've heard the priorities. I don't like public money being wasted, and that goes for benefits too. And I think benefits should be assessed, and that need should be met. But to do that, you don't start the process by saying we are going to save 25%. And the trauma that we've heard related by Sandra and Colin about this is very, very, well, I find it very distressing, I have to tell you. But David Cameron won't find it distressing, and Dan Alexander won't find it distressing, because they're not encountering the people who are suffering from that. They are very much isolated from that. So the priorities that we would choose are different from the priorities the UK government would choose and did choose. So they chose war, we chose peace. There was damage, good grief in Inverness, there was hundreds out. Conservative Inverness. I was still in the police at that time, and I was in the march, and the bloke walking behind me was the DS in the Special Branch. And I said, "Oh, how are you doing?" Yeah. So, and the Labour conference was on at that time, and they were terrified that the march would upset Mr Blair's visit to the Highlands. So they also choose privilege, and that privilege comes in the form of private health which will use public facilities, private health which has seen companies move in to the sector south of the border there, and that, you may say, well, an independent health service in Scotland, that won't affect. It will affect. The more private money that goes in there, the less public money that goes in there, the more that has an impact in the Barnett consequentials, and less money will be coming here. So there are different approaches. It's a bullying state, and I'm going to mention some names, and I'll be very discreet, and I'll only comment on one of them. It's a state that bullied Hilda Morrell, if any of you know Hilda Morrell. It's a state that bullied Willie McRae, and it's very difficult trying to challenge any establishment, and I include the legal establishment in Scotland. And it's a state that bullied David Kelly, and it's a state that shamefully, well, maybe to their credit, admitted bullying and murdering a lawyer at a short distance from here in the north of Ireland, Pat Finucane. So this isn't some third world, as it would be referred to, Banana Republic. This is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland colluded to kill someone. So I don't think we would have that sort of setup in Scotland, although I have to say the Cabinet Secretary for Justice, when I was his Parliamentary Liaison Officer, was unable to tell me whether the Lord Advocate could indeed direct the security services. He said, you need to ask them down the road. That's in one of the... So there are huge and growing inequalities, and these are evident for everyone to see, and I think for that reason it's better for all of us in Scotland to make decisions about Scotland's future here. We're the people who care most about Scotland. This is not about race. This is not about where people are from. This is everyone in Scotland, and I mean everyone in Scotland. Scotland is a rich, diverse country. Bashir Ahmed, Adil, people like that have enriched the country, the Irish influx, the Eastern European, Italians. We are the richer for that. I remember seeing the first black man, but it was actually when I was down seeing my granny, and I was going up Scots Monument, and it was people from West Africa. Now, lots of black faces, lots of brown faces, lots of all different faces across the Highlands now, and the Highlands is richer for that. So these are the people that should make. People who have decided to live in Scotland, stay in Scotland, invest their time, have their families in Scotland, are far better placed, as are the people in Wales to make decisions about Wales, and as are the people in Brighton to make decisions about Brighton, the people in Lithuania to make decisions about Lithuania. I will have no truck with racism whatsoever. I think this is a positive vision that I think we need to promote. In contrast to priorities, I've talked about the health service. Free healthcare in Scotland, no privatisation. 600,000 adults in Scotland earning less than £16,000 weren't eligible for prescriptions. I'm delighted that that is no longer the case. 77,000 people free personal care. Extremely important. Older people worry about becoming sick and the implications for that. What a reassurance that that isn't a concern anymore in Scotland. And when Colin was in Parliament and his party, they did much to drive that agenda forward, because that's the humane sort of approach to things that I think the Parliament needs. And if we simply focus on the balance sheet, we're not going to make any progress in this country. I was involved in... when I was in the council in reversing the leader of the SNP group that reversed the privatisation of the care homes in the Highlands. I have to say a decision subsequently re-reversed, if there is such a term, by our Lib Dem and Labour administration which followed us. And the concern I have about that is the concern about private care, and it's the concern about housing and everything else. It's quite rightly the case that the statutory obligation to look after people rests with the public sector. And what you have, and we saw it with Southern Cross or whatever that care home organisation was, they go into administration, the profits aren't sufficient for them, and they pull out. Nothing stops the local authority having that obligation, quite rightly having that obligation. So why not invest in the public sector and have, for instance, the wonderful council care homes we had in the Highlands, which are going to be replaced and contracted out. You touched on independent living there. I was very, very ambivalent about that. Ironically, a lot of the charities are supportive of it. In the wrong hands, it's a tool that will be abused. It will be abused because people will go, 100 disabled people to be looked after, X amount, that's it. And we have to protect things. So people who are defending daycare centres, people who are looking after older people's lunch clubs, the social contact is you cannot put a price on, and that's something. Universalism is the fancy term for provision of facilities for everyone. There's a load of nonsense being talked by Joanne Lamont about it. I'm not quite sure what she's on. The simple fact is that most of the hallucinogenics, I would imagine, the simple fact is, for instance, with some of these, they would cost more to administer doing means testing. It's 3% of the Scottish budget. It's equivalent of the savings, and I'm proud that we're going to stick to that. The concessionary travel, 1.2 million older people and disabled people. And I mention travel because there's opportunities, and this is what I want people to consider, the opportunities that come with independence. I was involved in a debate last week which wasn't particularly well attended because it was about planning, and planning is very boring to a lot of people. Planning is absolutely key to how a civil society works. And this was about the national level of planning, and I made comments about things like hill tracks that won't be of particular interest here, about community land and the right to buy extension there, which can relate and should relate in urban areas. I would like to see communities take control of land and take it out of the way of predatory developers, for instance. But it occurred to me later that so many of the fine plans that a government can put in place are pretty limited, because you take transport. Transport is at the behest of profit-making bus companies, and there may be a proposal coming forward in the Scottish Parliament, I understand from Ian Gray about that. Also, the trains. Perhaps with one exception, of course, that's the East Coast Line, a very efficient line that's in public control. And guess what? The trains actually run in time. You can get a cup of coffee. The folk are all very civil. And I would like to see that an opportunity is taken. The particular bit of legislation, the Railways Act of 1993, I've discussed it with the Transport Minister. He tells me that you would need to evidence that an organisation that had previous experience of running a railway, which is quite limiting if you think about it, could do it. But certified passenger transport, for instance, with their rail network. There's opportunities there to take things into public ownership. Now, that's not going to happen with a UK government. I'm not making much progress here, Colin, so you need to tell me if I'm speaking too long. I'll rattle through a few other things. High-speed rail, that's a great idea. I'm a great supporter of rail. Apparently in the north, in geography terms, if you're in Westminster, is Birmingham. That's the north. And then if you're very, very adventurous, it's Leeds. So I've nothing against the small island that is Great Britain, in relative terms, this wee bit off the northwest coast of continental Europe, having a high-speed rail network. But if a real commitment, why not build it south? Why not start in Scotland and build south? If that's really the commitment. Yeah, why not Inverness? In fact, I previously suggested Thurso, to be perfectly... Yes, I previously suggested Thurso, indeed, as the starting point. I think that would be very, very much a boost. Education. It's a birthright of a Scottish child to have free education. Education is another way of raising money in other places. Now, we've heard about the elitist approach that has been taken in regard to some universities. And also, you may have read this week, issues around the charitable status of certain public schools. Well, they wouldn't have charitable status in my book. And it's quite inconceivable. The state provides education for people, And if people want to educate in this school, they should get no assistance for that. They certainly should be considered a charity as far as I'm concerned. I'm very pleased the educational maintenance allowance has been preserved. And that's in stark contrast to 1.1 billion being removed from the further education budget in England. The education is devolved to Wales too. In new colleges, so Scotland plans to build new colleges in Glasgow, Kilmarnock and Inverness. The UK plans to build private prisons. Policing is at a 37-year low. Record numbers of officers. They're shedding thousands of officers south of the border and cutting salaries by 4,000. There'll be no privatisation of the policing in Scotland. There's wholesale efforts to privatise very intrusive elements of policing south of the border. And if you have any doubt as to the goodwill that may exist with London, the single police service is an opportunity to save a considerable sum of money over a 15-year period. There are short-term implications regarding support staff, but one of the implications is the £25 million a year for VAT. Now, efforts were made to have Her Majesty's Treasury write that off. These efforts were rebuffed. However, the UK government changed legislation to ensure that their academy schools were VAT-free. So there's something that, again, is a classic example. Local taxation is an opportunity with independence for that. The council tax is not a particularly good tax. In fact, it's what you would call a bad tax. And the opportunity for tax to reflect ability to pay. Because the issue that if Joanne Lamont wanted to focus on, and people who are entitled to concessionary travel needn't worry that they're not going to get a seat in a bus because the bus is full of millionaires. That's not going to happen. That's simply not going to happen. But of course, you have to pay for it. And if every party, and I include the party I was a member of, and I would have said this privately, but because of the way parties work, not publicly, you cannot have policies predicated on low taxation and sustaining and improving public services. So that bullet has to be bit. That's for sure. The relationships after independence, we're a very small group of islands. There will be a social union rather than a political union. It will be a case of equals. EU, well, I think we've heard a lot of nonsense in the EU in the last week. Well, there are different views about the value of the EU. I'm an internationalist. For me, I like the international cooperation. The Tories like the trade aspect, and other people like some of the social policies. I think there's an opportunity to look at these. The Queen is to be the head of state, apparently, according to Mr. Sandra. Now, I asked when this had become policy, and my answer was we were never a Republican Party. That wasn't the question I posed, but apparently because we've always said that independent Scotland, see, I'm still doing the wee bit, part of the Commonwealth, the Commonwealth's head of state is the Queen. Well, I think there's huge opportunities around constitution. If you take the situation in Iceland there, and I'm told that the Mexican constitution, for instance, has a clause in it forbidding acts of wars of aggression by the state. Now that's something that would be very commendable. The opportunity to enshrine some of the human rights, which the UK has signed up to, but seems very reluctant to put into practice, some of the children's rights, for instance, I think would be very helpful. Currency, well, honest to goodness, that's just a wobbly, it doesn't matter. You can have whatever, it could be the Bank of Toy Town. It is about how you trade with other people and how you do business. So really what it's called doesn't matter. But of course, if you call it the pound, that maybe doesn't scare folk so much. Now, another area where I think we can look at the taxation is the small business bonus. I'm a big fan of small. I like wee businesses. I think it's great to have lots of wee shops. And people bemoan in Inverness, they say to me, oh, it's terrible, there's nothing in the town centre except charity shops. And I says, oh, where do you do your shopping? Oh, I go to Tesco in the car. So, I mean, people can't have it always. So anything that would encourage small businesses is good for me. Conversely, corporation tax, I think, is an abysmal way to consider spending public money, because that's what you're doing. You're allowing the Amazons, the Tesco's of this world with their coloured accounts in the Cayman Islands to make more profit. And of course, what we've seen with the manufacturing base is it moves to Eastern Europe and then it moves to the Far East. So these are not the sort of people we should be rewarding. We must have capital borrowing powers. That's very fundamental. Some are on the way. Orkney Islands Council can borrow money. the Scottish Government can't. Whoever forms the Scottish Government, that's essential, because I would like to see, and certainly I think Colin may have heard me mention this before, thank you.
Kicked up the arse.
Yes, that was that's a very subtle kick up the arse too. The situation at the end of the Second World War, when the Highlands was revitalised by the then Secretary of State for Scotland, Tom Johnston, who brought in the hydro schemes, literally lit up the Grange. There's an opportunity with capital to do that. Now, I'm going to move very quickly to the last wee bit here, which was the one bit I thought, well, I'll come to, and that is to make a wee quote about, I'm going to quote an American president, so I better get it right, because that's probably the first and only time I'll ever do that. Roosevelt, political equality we once had won was meaningless in the face of economic inequality. You have a situation where a government in London that has one MP in Scotland that doesn't reflect the values of Scotland. We need to close the tax havens, we need to increase nursery hours, we need to acknowledge that Scotland isn't perfect, but we can shape it and make it. It's nothing to do with Alex Salmond, it's nothing to do with David Cameron, it's everything to do with the public. And the public must assert themselves, and I commend the Scottish Socialist Party for having meetings. I bemoan the lack of public meetings. I think that politicians hide away. I think they need to get out and speak. I believe we can have a fairer, more socially just Scotland if we make our own decisions. I hope you'll share that vision, and I hope you'll vote yes. More in time. Thank you very much.
What kind of Scotland do we want? I mean, the whole point is, the day after independence, it is up to us. You know what I mean? We write about, is that going to be the SNP Scotland? Is that going to be the SSP Scotland? It's going to be the people of Scotland, Scotland. It's all open for debate, and that's why we as a party are having meetings like this to just tell people, you know, what we think. And yeah, we do have a wish list. My wish list is a Republic of Scotland where everybody is treated fairly. And I think we've been quite open about this and been on the foot and campaigning, and we'll always will campaign about a vision of a utopia Scotland, but it's up to the people of Scotland. The thing about the gravy train, and MPs are totally agree with Ali, and you have to remember that benefit reforms are first mooted by Frank Fields, you know, another good socialist, you know, Ian Duncan-Smith works for him, you know, to do that. And you're right, it is a gravy train, and one thing you can say about us, hand on heart, is, you know, we're not on a gravy train, I'm a Colin, you know what I mean? We travel up and down.
Can't afford to ride the train.
Exactly. I had to get the bus here today because I couldn't afford the train, you know, we just come and do what we're doing. Who will guarantee it? We can't promise that. It's up to the people of Scotland to decide, you know. We've got a vision, and let's try and change people's attitudes and say, yeah, we can be a kind of fairer society. And as you said, you know, one of my favourite singers is Steve Earle, and he talks about an island of immigrants, and that's what Scotland is. That's what makes us stronger. We're a melting pot. We had Irish people coming over, we had people from the West Indies, we have Polish people, you're all welcome, and you bring so much, you know what I mean, into a community. And so gentlemen said, you're taxpayers, you know, you are contributing. And I don't think there'd be any problems about, you know, you won't get I'm sure you'll get a Scottish passport. I wouldn't worry about that. And yeah, and there are enough of us, you know what I mean, to help each other. And there are other methods of income as well. We still have plenty of North Sea oil and gas as well, and other resources that we can use. And if we've got companies like Amazon and Starbucks to pay their corporation tax, then we'll be wealthier too. Thanks.
The key things, well, it's a big long list I would have, but it would be summarised by the term, and it's a very frequently used and maybe sometimes seen as glib, but social justice. And I think you look after the vulnerable in society. That's your first obligation. You educate your society, you look after people's health. You give them security in their communities. And beyond that, I mean, it is a case of we need to discuss a range of priorities, and I would like to hear other people discuss their range of priorities. I would like to hear people actually lay out a vision, because something I find terribly frustrating is when people bandy about figures. If we take, for instance, I accept people have a different view on Trident, but could we, for the purposes of debate, agree the figure of people who are involved? You know? Who would be accepted as a reasonable arbiter? So, for instance, the STUC say if you want to do a cost benefits analysis, you would not replace Trident, these obscene sums. You would invest that, you would create more employment. So I think we need to lift the level of debate, and that's very challenging because, you know, I've got endless statistics that I frequently forget, and they do relate to the fact that there are trillions worth of oil, that you know, there's all this left. Scotland's a very wealthy country, and of course the OECD, that's a condition or a financial organisation, it's one or other. I'm sorry if it's a condition if I've got that wrong. They've said after independence, Scotland would be the 6th wealthiest country in the world, and the rest of the UK the 16th. I have to say, that's completely immaterial to me. It is completely immaterial to me. I would like to see the Scandinavian model of social justice. So that's what and a republic, because you're not democratic if you've got an unappointed head of state. And the UK government spent 15 months fighting a freedom of information request regarding the monarch, the benign monarch, and our laddies' interference in legislation. I asked a question and I got a record quick response. In fact, it was just a turnaround of a week following the Guardian's article, and the Scottish Government doesn't hold that information. Well, the next question you've worked out, who does hold that information? But yeah, if it's got royal assent, they must have been involved, basically was the answer I got. The Labour Party, I have to say, I mentioned Tom Johnson. I've never voted for the Labour Party. But the Tom Johnsons, the climate athletes, must be, you know, looking down and just being in dismay, the Keir Hardys, the John McLeans. This is, you know, it's the pursuit of power at UK level that's driven them away from this. The Labour Party, I don't think, was ever the supporter of the poor and the vulnerable. You would only need to look at the state of health inequalities and poverty inequalities. You know, 14 years difference, even in the city of Inverness, the town of Inverness, a mile and a half apart, 14 years difference. That's shocking, shocking indictment. Labour for independence, I think it's very important to take people on board. We're not going to win this without the Labour Party. Yeah. And the Labour Party are not necessarily speaking for their members. I encounter Labour supporters who recognise that the possibility of having a Labour social democratic government for their affairs is more likely to happen in independent Scotland or UK level. Greg, Britain, well, I apologise because I was hoping to lay out what the differences were. Now, the difference, you're absolutely right to say that that's UK money. It's pocket money. It's pocket money that comes. But these are decisions that Scotland make, and they do not about social care, health care, free prescriptions. That's not decisions that's made at UK level. And at UK level, they're busy privatising the health care for profit. So there is a difference there. And the formula for distributing has nothing to do with the geographic area. EU, you know, whatever people's views of the EU is not going to get rid of a wealthy country like Scotland, and Scotland is a wealthy country. It's a small, wealthy country. The conditions would certainly apply, and I can assure you that people from Eastern Europe, and there are many, there's several thousand in Inverness itself, are extremely welcome. And there'd be no, if you wish to check, the Scottish Government has been trying to get a derogation so that we can actually have not the same conditions as are imposed as regards to immigration as applies in the southeast of England. We want to encourage people here. Brian, wish you well on Saturday with that, and I think it's very important, and I'm heartened that there's people involved who aren't just the Scottish National Party, because there is a danger that certainly resource-wise, be that people or money, that the Yes campaign could get swamped with that. I can tell you, genuinely, that my understanding would be that the vast majority of Scottish National Party people welcome the broad coalition and recognise that. And certainly I've always worked very closely with a range of people in the Highlands about issues. So whether that's Colin's former colleagues or the Green Party. So I think it's very important that we have that consensual approach and offer a range, because Alex Salmon's not got the only vision for the future.
Brilliant. Before I take some other questions, I wanted to just say a couple of things, if you'll indulge me. I think the point that was raised about Jack Straw and MPs looking for £80,000 a year as a salary, apart from the sickening hypocrisy of a group of reptiles who voted to cap benefits last week looking for £80,000 for themselves, I'd want to stand here and put on record, when I was a member of the Scottish Parliament, MSP's got £55,000 a year, and after your tax, your national insurance, the bottom line, which is what we're all interested in, £2,600 a month. And as a Scottish Socialist Party MSP, on the first day of every month, I wrote a cheque for £1,300, which is half of it, and I gave it to the Scottish Socialist Party. That's the party's policy, and we take it as advice from perhaps the greatest socialist this city has ever produced thus far, James Connolly, born in the Cowgate, who famously advised socialists who seek to represent working class people, to Jack Straw, to Frank Field, to anybody else who's listening, you rise with your class, not out of it. When everybody's getting £80,000 a year, when school dinner ladies in Jack Straw's Blackburn constituency are getting £80,000 a year, then he can have 80,000. When lollipop ladies, when people who work in the Tesco's in Blackburn, whenever they're getting 80,000, then you can get it. Until they do, shut up. Because the reality is, politics is already seen in this country as being for a price. These reptiles, and I'm afraid it's true, I sat and John sits still beside some of them in the Parliament, they're interested in politics for what they can monetarily get out of it. I and John and others, I'm involved in politics for far, far, far better and more noble and ambitious objectives, which is to change the world. So the Scottish Socialist Party's policy is that we're in favour of workers' representatives and workers' wages, and it's important that we had workers' representatives because we did it. That's important because otherwise politics is just talk. Yeah, you say that, but if you get elected, well, you do it. Well, we did do it. I did do it. I'm proud of it. And I stand here in front of you and I can tell you face to face, looking at every single one of you, that I did it every month, year after year for 4 years, and that's important. The second thing I was just going to say, Sandra early on mentioned one of my heroes, Thomas Paine. If you read Thomas Paine today, this is revolutionary stuff today. This is a guy who talked about democracy, 1780s, 1790s, America, France, Britain. And you look, Christ, no come very far, have we? And Thomas Paine talked about a republic. Here we are in Britain, 2013, we still get a monarchy, a feudal relic from centuries ago. Look around Europe, where's the Queen of Germany? Where's the Queen of France? Where's the Queen of America? You know, where's the Queen of China? Where's the Queen of all these countries? It's nonsense. And yet we are still lumbered with it. So, in answer to the question Pat raises, what is independence for? Independence is for a republic. Independence is for full employment. That's a socialist belief. Everybody who wants a job should be entitled to get a job. Full-time if you want it, part-time if you want it, but it's your choice. No Tesco's or Sainsbury's. Full employment, public ownership, a republic, redistribution of wealth. These are our agendas. That's what independence is for. And I wanted to just say one thing, because I think Greg's hit the nail on the head. Ultimately, we have to be honest with one another. This is just so much hot air. If we're going to say who's going to guarantee us these rights, then the answer is no one. No one's going to guarantee us these rights. We've got to do it for ourselves. That's what Thomas Paine said. That's what Keir Hardie said. That's what Robert Burns said. We've got to do it for ourselves. Stop waiting on the rich to do you favours. They do favours for themselves, and it involves dancing in your head, and your grave, and your Wayne's grave, and your Mon Father's grave. Don't wait on anybody else. Who's going to guarantee us rights? Nobody. We've got to do it ourselves. I'm a socialist. I don't have any faith in the Labour Party. I don't have any faith ultimately in the SNP, I have to be honest with you. They're my colleagues in the independence movement. They're not socialists. I respect them, of course, but I'm trying to build a socialist country. And I have the same fears that if we simply replace, you know, we have a saltire flying over the Edinburgh City Chambers instead of the Union Jack, we could be here all day. Instead of soldiers being in the British Army, they're in the Scottish Army occupying Afghanistan and Iraq. Instead of having trident weapons that belong to the British state, they belong to the Scottish state. That's no progress. Amazon comes to Scotland and pays shitty wages, and Dunfermline don't pay any fucking taxes under a Scottish state. That's no good enough either. So there's a lot of things that we have to say. We have to influence this agenda, and my conclusion to you is, the way we influence this, you've got to get involved in Yes Scotland. You've got to ensure that the coloration of it is that we put the pressure on that when we win the victory, we can turn around and say, we contributed, we shifted the leaflets, we did the stalls, we done the fly posting, we had the meetings, we convinced our neighbours, friends and family to support independence. And I'm damn sure we're not going back to underemployment. We're not going back to standing in the Leith docks for a token, so you get 4 hours pay. You're not on. This is serious, and my advice to people, and Greg, the Polish community, the new Spanish community in Edinburgh, the new Scots as they're rightly called, this is your country as much as anybody else, and if you see any racist prick that tells you otherwise, then I want to see I apologise, I shouldn't even be speaking, but one thing I wanted to say, John rightly mentioned a guy called Thomas Johnson. Tom Johnson, young Tom Johnson was the editor of a fantastic socialist newspaper called Forward that came out in the 1920s and 30s, and he wrote a couple of books. You know, get these books, beg, borrow or steal them. Steal them from Joanne Lamont, but she'll not have them. He wrote 2 books. One is called Our Scots Noble Families. He was being sarcastic. It's all about the landowning aristocracy in this country and how they own the land, how they owned the coal mines, how they owned people, working people. It's a fantastic read. It seems awfully dry when I tell you it's about the land registry of Scotland in 1888. But it's a fantastic attack on the Duke of Hamilton, the Duke of Buccleuch, the dukes and duchesses, the aristocrats that unfortunately were still lumbered. We read it. And then go on to read his other fantastic book, which is called A History of the Scottish Working Class, that explains where we come from, that we are here tonight as part of the movement that started 250 years ago in Glasgow with the weavers, the first people who combined together to set up the unions, Paisley. We are part of the tradition that belongs to the Tolpuddle Martyrs, the Chartists, the Suffragettes, the Socialists for yesteryear in Red Clydeside. That's his great legacy. I have to say in passing that when he got older he turned into an arsehole. He was a Scottish Secretary of State, a great play to the guy. He helped establish the Hydro Board, but he became another reptile, jackstraw, right-wing Labour sellout, and so much so that he instructed, when he was the Secretary of State for Scotland, all the civil servants had to go around the country burning copies of the books I just told you about because he's so ashamed about them. That's what he happened to be in elder life, so I just mention it because he wasn't entirely rounded by the time that he died. Right? Anyway, I